Today is Thursday, May 29th, 2025, and you have found the Living Youth Podcast. My name is John Robinson. I'm here again with my favorite podcast co-host, and frankly, the only one I've ever had, Mr. Wallace Smith.
Aw, well, you are such a softie. And I have to say, I am so glad you're back, Mr. Robinson, especially for those who listened to last week's podcast and they heard all my editing fiascos. I know that you don't necessarily do the editing, but maybe just the lack of your presence, your reassuring presence, caused me to cast aside all editing restraints. I have no idea what.
You missed my aura somehow.
I think so. That and also I think I was rushing because I want to be ready for guests that we had coming over, which, by the way, guests who listen to the podcast, so hello out there if you are our guest that evening. Don't take it on yourself that I made some editing mistakes. That's completely me.
Well, I think you explained it to some. We're experimenting a little bit with maybe you've talked about before, a more
podcast
out
to the world.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I've been playing around a little bit with the intros.
Yeah. Some of y'all don't even realize, but some of the ones we've done recently on wolves and others, we've actually made some demos where there's a version of that podcast pointed to the world. And as a result, we've recorded, because they're just demos, we've recorded multiple intros for those. And then, anyway, in this case, I went ahead and did the other intro, but then I just left it in there. Not to mention the fact that when the announcement goes on, and hopefully some of y'all saw this comment on YouTube, when there's an announcement here at the office half an hour before the office building is going to be closed to let people know if you're going to stay later, make sure you sign in at the front. And that announcement came on, and I made a note to myself, I need to come back and cut that out. And well, then I never came back and cut it out. But then also, I didn't even have to because you couldn't hear the announcement on the recording anyway, so I just sounded kind of weird. So anyway, here we are spending our first minute of the podcast explaining about the problems of the last podcast. But the point is, you're back, Mr. Robinson. It's very nice to have you back, and we have a regular podcast today.
I enjoy doing the podcast very much. So there was something in the announcements last week that maybe some didn't even notice, but was interesting to us that we wanted to talk about. What's our topic today, Mr. Smith?
Our topic for today's podcast is the surprising blessings of physical Bibles. Thank you for hanging around through the music. And again, welcome to the podcast. I do apologize. I was going to spend more time talking about it, but it's kind of silly to do that. I do apologize for those who wonder what in the world was going on with the last podcast. Thankfully, it wasn't too bad. In fact, I think some of you didn't even notice that there was sort of 2 intros buried in there. By the time you get about 8.5 minutes in and you hear me muttering to myself like a crazy person about, I needed to edit something out, then you recognize something was off.
Following the pattern of Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, where it sounds like it covers the creation again a second time after covering it the first time.
Wow. Let's assume that's literally the best explanation and also the wrongest that I've heard. But we're going to edit, I'm sure, perfectly this time, Mr. Robinson. And our point, I think, is worthwhile. So you may have heard in the announcements last Sabbath that Mr. Weston is encouraging all the ministry behind the lectern when we are preaching to you from the Bible, that we actually use a physical Bible instead of a digital one of some sort.
Well, he brought it up, in the hour and a half long ministerial online conference.
That's right. He
so
did.
He could elaborate a little bit more about it. And, obviously the announcement has to be brief for obvious reasons.
Oh, right.
So, it was interesting that he brought it up. And it was something I've thought about in the past. I was never very dogmatic about it one way or the other, but it was interesting that he brought it up and cared about it. And I think he has a point. Well, I don't even think, Mr. Smith, he has a point.
He does. And we had talked about it at the council meetings. And then some of you wouldn't realize that after the council meetings, we'll often have a large online ministerial conference. So we could talk to all the ministry.
He seems to like to bring the rest of the ministry up, abreast with what was discussed in the Council of Elders.
It's one of the things I like about, I would love to have a physical conference again sometime in the future, but that is very expensive versus having an online one, shortly after the council meeting really gives him and Dr. Winnale, Mr. Rob McNair, such an opportunity to kind of update the rest of the ministry real fast.
Take some questions?
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Take some questions. Well, in this case, we had talked about it, and just to make it plain, it was not an anti-digital Bible crusade. Actually, there's a lot of benefits. Mr. Weston talked about using a computer Bible. In his own case, sometimes it can be helpful for Bible study. He'll use it for some Bible study. He can use it for, I think, assembling his sermons. Definitely, you can copy and paste. It's easier to find things. But actually, for his own personal study, he does prefer a physical Bible. But it really, and we'll kind of get into some of the pros and cons a little bit later. But I just want to highlight, in case I'm afraid someone now, like Mr. Nathan mentioned that, he did I think a Passover service in Kenya once. And of course it's Passover, so it's got to be in the evening, and it was dark, and the only lighting in the whole room were like 2 hurricane lamps and his iPad, and that was kind of it that he was reading from. And so Mr. Weston did highlight that, from behind the lectern, we might have eyesight problems. Some of us need bigger fonts than we used to when we were much smaller. You can get Bibles in 12 point, 20 point, it might be 80 point, might be kind of hard to find. But also, honestly, sometimes you've got to make a trip, and especially some of these more extreme travelers we have out there, and they might have barely any luggage at all. And sometimes your iPad or something is easy to just grab. But still, he wanted to encourage those of us behind the lectern to use a physical Bible. And I think the topic's very important for me, because if people have watched my sermons on our YouTube channel, they know I use an iPad a lot, so that they see me with that. So all the more, it's something that I definitely want to address. But I did want to highlight, this is not an anti-digital Bible crusade in some kind of way. In fact, Mr. Robinson and I both make extensive use. What do you use, Mr. Robinson? I believe I know the one, but I'm just curious. For digital Bibles.
Friend of the podcast, Phil Senna. He recommended to me, probably at this point, this has to be, probably 15 years ago, at least, something like that. A little known, back this then. Is more than you ever wanted to know. The Macs were struggling for a while there, and they didn't have a lot of developers, but there was this little indie developer that made a really neat Bible software package that was just for the Mac. And these guys were particularly into search, so they were super sophisticated searches you could do. But it was getting a little dated, but they updated it. He recommended it to me. I grabbed it, love it. I've invested in it over the years. I have a lot of resources now. And, one thing I was going to say, as you were kind of introing this topic, it took me a while to move away from using a physical Bible to using my computer more, but it was just tough to beat, if nothing else, searching. How quick you could search, and how quick you could not just searching for a word, but the Greek and Hebrew words, and it also has variations you can look for. Anyway, I don't want to get too nerdy about it, but like the power of it allowed you to research a topic much quicker than if you had just your Bible and maybe a couple resources, which I am not down on at all. In fact, every so often I think we would probably all be better off individually if all we had was torchlight and a fire and a couple of resources. Like, you would have to get to know the Bible.
Yeah.
There's a huge advantage to that.
Yeah.
One thing I'll say,
Definitely
love the
about
software, but man, if you took the software away from me, because I'm so used to it now, and I had to go back to only my Bible, it would take me a while to ramp back up on where everything is in the Bible. Absolutely. Mr. Hernandez has mentioned that.
Maybe we're not endorsing products here, but is Accordance the one that
yes,
is that the same one? Okay.
Yep.
Way back when I was a PC guy and not a Mac guy, I used a PC study Bible, which was a big deal at the time. One thing I liked about it was it had a macro that you could. I like writing my own macros for Word and Excel and stuff, but it had one that if you're in Word, it would go, you could run the macro, it would go to PC Study Bible and bring in the verse you had just typed or something. That was kind of convenient. But actually, also, friend of the podcast, Mr. Phil Senna, recommended to me Logos, which was, I liked Logos for a while, but it was like drinking from a fire hose. It had so many resources, just being shoved in my face, that I thought it was difficult. I'm currently trying it again to actually learn to tame it, because there are a lot of good resources there. But even online, like if I want multiple translations, I'll by default go to BibleHub.com. I think it's .com. But Bible Hub, it's just, you got 20, 30 translations, sort of all in one place. For original language work like Greek and Hebrew, I like just Blue Letter Bible .org, kind of a classic out there.
I used that for years before I finally bought Accordance.
Oh yeah, it's been out. You feel like they made the internet and then they made BlueLetterBible.org, so it's been out there. However, here's the thing: all those can be really useful, but at the same time, Mr. Robinson and I, like a lot of ministers, where did we really cut our teeth, so to speak. Mr. Weston keeps using that phrase, and it's a good one. You're talking about how like a baby has to cut teeth when you're young. Well, we cut our teeth on physical Bibles, a long time ago, before when PC Study Bible came out. That was like fantastic. It's like, oh wow, I can search with strings instead of getting a Strong's Concordance or this or that. But before that, yeah, it was all physical Bibles, all my original study, and I still have notes where with my Bible, maybe a Strong's Concordance to find the phrases, and I've still got some of those notes where I was looking up verses. And we cut our teeth on physical Bibles. So common to us that sometimes we'll just call them Bibles when really it's not like the others aren't either. And we'll get into the benefits of that in a moment. There are benefits to a physical Bible. But as we talked about in the council, as Mr. Weston talked about when he talked with the ministry, is that increasingly it's very easy to kind of be, for your first Bible and essentially your only Bible, to be this online Bible only or this digital Bible only. And like you just said, Mr. Robinson, there are benefits you do miss out on in terms of what you're used to the point that if that's all you have, eventually you're kind of missing some things. There's benefits to a physical Bible that you're missing out on, especially when you're still young. And we know many of our listeners are just that. When you're still young and you're still learning your way around the Bible. So what we thought would be good for today's podcast is to talk about the blessings and benefits that come from a physical Bible. Not that we're saying, throw out, get rid of all your other apps or whatever else you use to find things, but at the same time, to not neglect that time with a physical Bible, at home for reading and for study, such that you will understand that it really is a blessing to be able to have. And we thought we would take some time to just kind of go through these. And we might have different ideas between the two of us. And if we have time afterwards, because some of you may think, okay, well, now maybe I don't even have one. It's possible that some of you out there, your iPhone Bible is your only Bible. That's part of what's hitting us in the ministry, is that actually could be the case out there, and we're not used to that. And maybe you want to get one. Well, maybe we'll have a few, if we have time at the end, we'll have a few tidbits, some pieces of advice in terms of what to keep in mind when you get one. So, all right, Mr. Robinson, the first thing I wanted to say about a blessing or benefit to a physical Bible, and I kind of get the sense this might have been something you were kind of pointing towards a while ago, is that with a physical Bible, it's easier to get an explicit sense of the whole Bible's arrangement.
Yes.
You literally, the books are in order, and you're learning the order of the books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. And it's very difficult to get that sense when all you're really using is a digital Bible all the time.
Yes. No, I totally agree with that. A couple anecdotal stories. You and I are familiar with the same one Mr. Hernandez talks about. He really knows his Bible physically inside it out. And he kind of it's almost even like, when you learn how to tie a tie after a while, eventually you don't even know how to tie a tie. Your hands just tie it for you. It's that muscle memory kind of idea. And that he just, when he's looking for a topic, he begins to, he knows about where it is in the Bible, not just where it is flipping open pages, but like, oh yeah, that's in the top left corner up here, or that kind of verse like that. My wife as well is a good example. She's always stayed with in services studying. She has her Bible out and taking notes. And I have been using my phone for probably 10 years. And I have honestly been thinking over the last couple years that maybe I ought to make myself go back to in services, following along with a regular Bible. But she knows her way around the physical Bible and can find what she's looking for much better than I can. I am almost entirely reliant on just searching for what I'm looking for. Yeah. It's just such an easy thing to do.
It's too easy. It's like a crutch.
Yeah.
It's when you start, like I remember, and Mr. Milich mentioned this to me way back when I was training in Kansas City, that if you're visiting someone and they have a question, that's someone who's interested in the church, and they have a question, it is powerful to be able to find their answer in their own Bible, and not even yours. And I remember that the first time that literally happened is while I was still training in Kansas City, if I recall, and was visiting with someone who's interested in the church, and they had a question about what was our church government like, right? What is the structure of our church like? And they had a Bible, and I said, well, hey, you have a Bible there. Let's turn to 1 Corinthians 12 real quick. And to kind of have a sense of where that was, flipping through and being able to find it. And there's something to knowing you're in a sense, you really are in the pages physically in Corinthians. You're physically, even if you're not like right close to where you see the number, still it's on the page somewhere. You see that you get used to those things, and it helps to sink in better. And it was powerful for him to see right there. Here's how the Bible talks about structures of layers of authority in the church. And that's how our church is structured. I didn't have to now, but if I just go to my phone and say, okay, where's that verse on apostles and evangelists, and I'm typing in apostles and evangelists, and I'm finding on my phone real quickly, it's just not the same kind of impact. But working with a physical Bible helps to impress those locations and those places in your mind better.
One of the things I was really struck by as a kid growing up in the church and having my own physical Bible and trying to follow along for the most part once I became a teenager, especially, so you're maybe sitting there in church and it's the sermon starts and time to open up, maybe he's turning somewhere in the New Testament, and time to plop the Bible open roughly where you think the New Testament is. And honestly, for a couple of years, I would try to open it about halfway, and then that's when you're reminded. Which I think there's actually a subtle little lesson in this. 2/3 of the Bible is the Old Testament. Like you need to turn well past halfway to start getting to the New Testament part. And the reason I think that there might be a subtle lesson in that is how mainstream Christianity kind of likes to minimize the Old Testament and focus everything on the New Testament. But it's like, well, so are we excluding 2/3 of the Bible and not even counting how often the New Testament quotes the Old Testament? So I don't know. There were just little things like that, and you just get a better feel for how the Bible is structured, where God put weight on things, how he tells the story. I was always in awe of how Mr. Ogwyn would break the Bible down into sections and kind of how they would work together. And you just get a better feel for that when you have a physical Bible. How big books are, like, I've been scrolling through Isaiah forever, and Jeremiah and Ezekiel. There's so much dedicated here. And if you're just on an electronic thing and you just zip it around, you don't get a feel for how long some of those books are.
Oh yeah, both things you said there, like the fact that you have a sense because it's at your fingers, it's in your eyeballs, that you have Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. And they belong together, right? There's a reason those are together the way that they are, right? And you start to realize you're in general parts of the Bible. I love the way you talked about how it gives you more of an impression of how much of the Bible is the Old Testament to literally see it in a book. That's exactly the point that I wanted to make about it's more than just an explicit sense of the Bible's arrangement in terms of knowing exactly, well, there's Genesis, Exodus, and actually just knowing the order of the books of the Bible, but also this kind of implicit sense. Like, for instance, when I'm reading the Gospels from a physical Bible, and so let's say let's just pick Matthew, say the first of the Gospels, which again, if you know Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and you know your physical Bible. Well, when I'm reading about Christ's ministry in the Gospels, and as I'm reading his ministry, and I have a Bible in front of me, flat in front of me. Well, there's the vast part of the Bible has already passed, right?
Yes,
you get it's not just you're seeing his words on one screen. You're not getting a sense of what's in the past, but I'm seeing, let's just say 2/3 just for kick, but say 2/3 of the Bible. And it's this cool, almost like kinesthetic, physical reminder. His ministry was building on all of this that came before it. This is not the beginning of the story. This is not even the middle of the story. You've had so much that's gone before. And when he's referring to, you have heard it said, well, you're looking physically at the pages there on the left-hand side that all those things were said. Even when you think of reading this, I know this sounds like subtleties, and some people might be quick to dismiss some of these things, but that's kind of the sort of thing we're talking about, is that it does make a difference. Is the difference between seeing a speaker with a tie on and a tie off. Depending upon the environment, it might turn you off. It might make you more interested. Well, when you turn to Genesis 1:1 in a physical Bible, and you're literally seeing the very beginning of this vast book. There's nothing on the left but a table of contents and maybe a fake leather cover. It feels like the beginning. It impresses upon you, this is the beginning of the whole shebang. And then jump all the way to the end. When you're in Revelation and you're reading the last book of the Bible, and it's literally the last physical book. You got this vast part of the Bible to your left, and you're coming up on like maybe a little mini concordance and maps. You're coming to the end of the Bible. It impresses upon your brain even more. This is the climax. This is the climax of the entire story. That is not meaningless. It is helpful to give you a sense of your Bible.
I had a similar, let's say, revelation that sounds apocalyptic. Just I had a more of an aha moment, and this, you wouldn't necessarily have to tie this to a physical Bible, okay?
Okay.
But I did this reading. I read the Bible at one point from cover to cover, I think in my mid 20s, and I really overall quite enjoyed doing it. But it gave me this perspective. And again, I guess you could read through a digital one and kind of get the same idea. But I don't know. I feel like it made more of an impact reading a physical Bible. And you get through the most fundamental revelation of the Bible there with Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and then you start going into the history of Abraham and his expanding family, and them going into slavery and coming out and becoming a mighty nation that God steered through. And really a lot of the rest of the Old Testament is more or less the consequences of when Israel did what they were supposed to, or when Israel didn't do what they were supposed to. It's just a recording of what happened, the consequences. That's an oversimplification. And then you start getting to, the prophets, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and you just see Israel they get crushed and off into captivity. The Judah hangs on a little longer, but they actually don't learn the lesson of their sister Israel, and they go into the same problem. And then you see this restoration, and there's a recognition that, we didn't keep the covenant. And God constantly focuses on, they broke the Sabbaths and they fell into idolatry. Okay. And so you're reading through the minor prophets, and this is just kind of reinforced over and over. And then you get to Malachi and you're finished and you're like, wow. And then you start Matthew, and in Matthew 5, as Christ is starting to go into the, what are those called? Not the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah. Matthew 5, 6, 7.
And he says, very early on, do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. When he says that, built on everything you just read in the Old Testament, the idea that God wasn't actually serious about the law, and the lesson we were supposed to learn was the law was actually bad, after just crushing Israel and Judah over and over and over again, just sounds particularly preposterous. And I think sometimes that's the kind of perspective you can only get by having, you don't have to read in a physical Bible necessarily, but like for me, reading through the Bible and you're 2/3 of the way through, then the idea that this new doctrine is being introduced, that the law was contrary to us and against us, just seems ludicrous.
Right. I completely agree that would be the case. Again, we're not talking about, is it impossible to get that from a digital Bible? We're not saying that. We're talking about the blessing and benefit of doing it with a physical Bible. Even you're referring to the Sermon on the Mount. It means something when you recognize, I'm in the Sermon on the Mount, and you're in Matthew 5 or 6, and you realize, well, yeah, chapter 5 just started. I'm currently flipping into chapter 6, and I see the big number 7 on the page on the other side, and you feel like you're in a physical place. Matthew 5, 6, and 7 feels like a location.
Yes.
On your screen, all locations look the same. Mm-hmm. It's just not the same. Well, this did make me think of what I used to do with my math students. One day I think one of my math students is going to discover things I say and like, yeah, I hated that. Listen. But I'm teaching trigonometry and calculus, more so those classes than algebra. In fact, trigonometry in particular. So some of you have taken this, you're gonna think this sounds atrocious, but I had a method to my madness, and it's very much related. I would take say we're graphing the trigonometric functions, sine, cosine, tangent, all those. And before we're going to have to use calculators. It's silly not to use calculators. At some point when you're doing certain math, you would it's hobbling not to. It's kind of like saying, hey, okay, we're going to get around town, but we're not going to use cars. It's like, okay, but at the same time, because the calculators can hobble you in other ways, you get too quick access to tools like that, you will not acquire the habits of mind that you need. Right. And I wanted my students, as much as I could have them acquire it, to have more of a sense of these functions. Like, what is their behavior really like? I wanted them to know and be familiar with them. So I would actually have them, some of you, I'm not trying to cause any flashbacks, but I would actually have them make charts. And they would use calculators to calculate the numbers, because otherwise that is much harder. But they'd actually do little XY plots, and I'd had them plot point after point after point until they could see how this curve, there's times when it just starts to shoot up, but then it levels off, and it does, and then it starts to go down. And they'd plot these points, and to give them almost a tactile sense of what are these functions like, what's happening with their values. And once I was more comfortable, they were familiar with that, then we might transition to the calculators that could graph and other things. Well, the same point was made actually in the council discussions. It was such a good point. I can't remember if it was, I think it was Jonathan McNair. I can't recall, Mr. McNair, but I think it was him who highlighted that, GPS, like I use Google Maps on the phone all the time, or Apple Maps. GPSs are great. It's great to have a machine that knows where you're going and can tell you turn right, turn left, and all those kind of things. Well, there are those who have, say, only used those. But then there are those who use those, but who also have used maps, like paper maps, where you have a layout of the land and you're having to use different symbols, and you're having to know, okay, it's in square A5, like you're playing Battleship or something. The point was that if all you have is a GPS and that's all you've used, you're not even, say, the best of GPS users. There's something about having to figure out where you're going in a more analog kind of sense that not only makes you just more equipped in general, but then when you do use a GPS, you use it better.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, I think, a benefit here too. The more comfortable you can be with a physical Bible, even your digital Bible becomes a better tool for you.
Well, since I can't relate to plotting graphs and doing math, I think the GPS is actually a fantastic example. I remember when we first came to Charlotte and I started driving around in Charlotte, I'm driving around for like 2 weeks. And I'm like, what is up with this city? I have a lot of driving experience. I have driven in major cities before. I've even driven in Paris a couple of times. And there was nothing quite like Charlotte. It just has this kind of honeycomb layout where there's not a lot of north, south, and east, west things. And you go down a road that looks like it's going to go where you want it to go. That's your first mistake. And so I relied on GPS a lot. But after a few years, I very, very consciously made the decision to stop using the GPS, to make myself, things swerve around, but learn the names. It's even more frustrating because streets will change names in the middle. Right. Very common Charlotte thing. What is it? It goes, Matthews, Mint Hill, and then halfway through it changes the other way around or something. Anyway, it's all this. And I almost never use GPS anymore in Charlotte, except when I'm really going further away and it's somewhere I'm not familiar with, I'll let it map it. But like you said, I know the overview of the overall city much better. And so I just, even then your GPS is more of a tool to help you because you have an idea of where things are and how to get around. And it made me a much better driver by not relying on the GPS, in my opinion. And it just became a crutch, frankly. Yeah. And I do want to say something because I realized this, I could very easily sound like a pure hypocrite here. I still do and will still make extensive use of the software at my disposal to do research and find things and everything. But I have always, I can at least give myself credit for this, except for last week in Silva. I have my notes printed out. I don't think there'd be a problem to have your notes in an iPad. I just don't have one. But I always have the Bible, and I always turn to the scriptures there with them, with everybody in my Bible, and I will still continue to do that. But man, there's so much power at your fingertips. I was thinking about what it would take to replicate what I have with books based on what the software I have. And you just go with the commentaries. I have 4 or 5 commentaries I reference off and on, but with some regularity. You would want a lexicon and, a Greek to English dictionary and all these things. And like, you're starting to talk about a library full of books. And to have it at my fingertips on my computer is really nice. I do my notes on my Mac in their built-in notes, which saved me this last week, as for the first time ever in my 15-year history of speaking, I did not take my notes to church. And so I had to do it off. And it was so funny because Mr. Maney had just given the announcement about how we weren't supposed to be, or we were minimize our usage of electronics at the lectern. I literally come up with no Bible and an iPhone. But thankfully I explained to everybody what was going on. You
visually became the worst example possible. That's what, Mr. Weston did highlight those examples. He said, look, sometimes we get caught. Like I've had that happen where I forgot my Bible. Now I will say I've had it happen where I forgot my iPad when I was trying to plan on using it. Well, I can grab my wife's Bible. I'm just as comfortable.
Just ad-lib it.
Yeah, just add. Don't make
Did you
stuff up.
really add no notes?
No. What did I do? I know I probably was able to pull my notes up on
Okay.
on. Oh, no, actually, that was I'm thinking of a TWP, and I actually had printed notes at that particular time. But regardless, yeah, I remember being caught once and didn't have anything printed. The hotel didn't have a printer, and that was actually before I think I even had an iPad, and I literally had to pull something off of my phone. What do you do when you're you're traveling and you don't have the stuff you need? But however, we're not talking about exceptional circumstances like you apparently were last weekend in Silva. We're talking about what is our normal practice? What is it we're doing? What is it we're aiming at? And in terms of being behind the lectern, we want to use the physical Bible is it because we have to? Well, it's because we're trying to go the extra mile to help set a particular example. In fact, one of the things, and this is going to lead to some science in a minute, science warning. But before that, not just science, but anecdotal, I find when I'm using, even if it's an iPad or my iPhone, it's so easy to get distracted.
Yep.
It's easy for me, and even if it's innocent at first, I'm kind of reading and I think, I want to see what Jameson Fawcett Brown in the commentaries say about that. Well, because it's really easy. It's a click away.
Great point.
And I go to the commentary, and then I read something else that intrigues me. And it's like, oh wow, that word, I didn't realize that could mean that. And next thing you know, I'm clicking, I'm reading a lexicon. So that's not even going to Twitter or something. That's just me. And I've suddenly, I don't know, there's a word for it, and I can't remember what it's called, but I'm just going to say I'm Wikipedia diving, essentially, where you follow link after link, and people don't realize you feel smart because you're looking at so many things.
It's not like you're not learning something.
That's right. But it is this plague of shallow focus these days.
Yes.
Where really you bet you covered 8 different things, but with no depth or even just meditation at the time. And those are the, let's just say, more innocent, kind of easy to understand distractions. Also, frankly, my phone, if I don't turn up my notifications, next thing you know, there's a notification at the top. I got an email or text from you, or an email from someone. Oh, I really need to check that now. I got to do that.
Or it's something you didn't want to hear, and it just triggers you in the whole rest of your Bible study.
Oh, that's true. You get some bad news about something. It's like, what? My Amazon product isn't available. I was counting on that this weekend, and now you're continuing your study, but you feel crummy or whatever. And you know what doesn't do that? My physical Bible. It's not like the page ever folds over and says, oh, by the way, the mail's running late and you won't get your item until next week. There's something, it's very natural focus. And regrettably, for some people that can actually be awkward. Social media is literally rewiring our brains to where if we have to focus for a long period of time, we don't feel comfortable. Mr. Wahovich sent a fantastic video about how professors are struggling. Their students don't know how to read anything of any length anymore. It's not that they can't read. It's that their brains are no longer prepared to do so. And that's another thing we risk losing.
You know, I hate to admit it, but it is true. And my attention span is not what it was.
Being damaged, huh?
Yeah, it is. And even though I don't, and I never have, I've never done TikTok or Shorts, which is a true attention span killer. It's enough damage has been done that I can tell it's just a little harder for me when I'm doing a Bible study and really deep diving on a topic you're into. Maybe you're preparing a new sermon. It's just not what it was. Back in the day, before the internet was really much of a thing, I mean, it existed, but it was kind of in the periphery a little bit. And, you would sit down and do your Bible study. You were relatively, it wasn't too hard to focus on it, especially if you were really into it, and you weren't worried about things getting distracted. I thought you made a good point earlier about, you were talking about how if there's a phone that's off and face down on a table.
I'm going to talk about that next. I brought up the studies.
I'm setting you up.
Nah, you are setting me up. Good job.
Well, I have a thought about that too. If you want to move into that.
You bet.
Just my attention's not what it was, and to my detriment. Because it is just harder to stay focused on. Look, your brain's going to read something and encounter something. If you're studying a topic and maybe there's some of the commentaries, I'm like, what are you guys even talking about here? And you just gotta muddle through difficult things, and the brain doesn't want to do it as much anymore because it's used to a little more instant gratification.
You know, it really is. It is kind of sad because my family and I will watch YouTube. You know, in the evening, it's kind of become a television sort of replacement. And you know, it's funny. I never put this connection together, and now I'm doing so, and it's shaming me because you know I'll look at the YouTube feed. You know, the algorithm has learned what we like, and it's offering such things. And sure enough, I'm going through the videos, and it's like, that's like 20 minutes long. I don't want to watch. I don't want to watch 20 minutes. That's I don't get the energy for that. But here's a 5-minute one. Oh, I'll watch that. And then next thing you know, you watch 6 5-minute ones that really add up to 30 minutes. Well, have you spent more time? Well, here's the proverb that's triggering me now. In Proverbs 19 and verse 24. A lazy man buries his hand in the bowl and will not so much as bring it to his mouth again, right? Well, look, I've always thought that was ridiculous. Like, the Bible's exaggerating. You know, who's so lazy they stick their hand in a Cheeto bag and then won't bring it to their mouth?
Yep.
And I realized that's becoming me on YouTube. You know, I won't have, I was like, do I really have to, like at the 20-minute video, I'm literally sitting still with a cup of coffee and could just watch something that's interesting for 20 minutes. And instead, no, I'd much rather watch the 100 clips at 3 minutes long.
So let me back you up on this. Because same for me. I don't have X. I was never on Facebook.
By X, you mean Twitter. I can't stand calling it
the
X.
Nation, the app formerly known
as Twitter.
I kind of have one thing, and it's YouTube, and it's like you said, it's like a TV replacement. Except it's even worse. So let's say because you note 2 things: the thumbnail and how long is it. Okay, and so you're like, really, it's going to take you 12.5 minutes to explain that? I just okay. So, but then I'm watching a 4-minute video that I'm not sure if I'm into or not, and I'm like 7 seconds in. I'm like, how long are you going to take to get to this? And then you can double tap and skip 10 seconds. So a 4-minute video becomes like a 2.5-minute video, and it just killing the mind's ability to focus on something.
It is. And, you know, it's actually so much worse than that. And this is what I wanted to bring up. And I think someone mentioned it a bit at the council. We've even talked about it outside before that. And I've got several references. They have found, like actual studies. In fact, one's called the brain drain study. There's a study there. There's a study out of University of Toronto did a study. University of Texas. Well, I hate to admit it as an old Texas Aggie, but University of Texas has done good research in this regard that have found that even when your phone is not on, even when you have it, say, on the table in front of you, face down, notifications off, turned off, not going to chime, not going to grab your attention, that its mere physical presence causes people's cognitive capacity to lower. In fact, I found one, they called it, where is it? Let's see. That's not it. Let me find it. Oh, they call it the phone proximity effect. And let me read like some summaries. One, the presence of a smartphone can significantly impact cognitive functions even when it's not actively being used. Silencing and placing a phone face down apparently does not eliminate the distraction effect. The phone proximity effect can operate unconsciously, impacting cognitive performance. That means your ability to think, even when individuals are not consciously aware of the distraction. Removing phones from the immediate environment can help improve focus and cognitive performance. Here's a quote from an article. The article is from a website, dataquest.io, titled "The Phone Proximity Effect. Your Phone Could Be Sabotaging Your Studies." It's meant for students and is published February 7th, 2019. And it says that you had people who put the phone on their desk, like away from them, right, on their desk, and then some who put it in their bag or in their pocket, right? And then others who put it in a completely different room. Now, you think it's in your backpack. Surely it's not bothering you, right? Versus the cases were clear. Those who left it on the desk, even if it was making a noise, they performed worse. Those who had it in their backpack, physically on them, even if they weren't touching it, weren't holding it, did a little better than the desk people, but still not as good as the people that made sure they put it in the other room. That were told to put it in another room, they did better. It says the results of the cognitive testing strongly suggest that the physically closer our phone is, the worse we perform, even if it's silent. The article highlights thinking that perhaps students had been secretly checking notifications, because that's what they were thinking. Well, why are kids doing worse? Maybe they're checking their notifications, looking at the screen. That's not the case. The researchers conducted a similar experiment and asked some students to shut their phones off entirely. It turned out it did not matter.
Wow.
Cognitive performance was worse for people whose dead phone is sitting on the desk than for those in the room. And I have a pop theory about that. I think our brain consciously keeps track, well, subconsciously, of where everything is. And when we use our phones, we're so tied to that. We know what we do with our phones. We know my phone is the environment for looking at email, watching YouTube videos, texting you, texting my wife, texting my kids. And as long as it's present, it's like your brain has my theory, your brain has a little subroutine that's mindful of it. And whatever processing power your CPU is devoted to the presence of that object, it's not devoted to reading. It's not devoted to focusing on the person you're talking to, or for that matter, the Bible that you're trying to read.
Yeah.
That's at least that's my take.
No, I think that's pretty solid. We think just because something's put away that it's out of sight, out of mind, and we don't seem to function that way. Especially something as sticky as a phone. You know what I mean by sticky? Just like There's something you could shove in a drawer and you'd never think about again, but that's not a phone. We're aware of it. We're going to use it later. We rely on it so much for communications and entertainment and other things. It's like it doesn't go out of mind quite so easily as other items.
Let me make what might be a radical, and in fact, it might be so radical it distracts some people. But please don't be distracted. I'm trying to do an extreme version. I think let's say I were a gun owner and I set my gun down on a table somewhere. And then I'm taking care of other stuff, in the room. Maybe I got to go get something. Maybe I'm going out hunting, right? And so I set my rifle, on the table. Well, I don't care where I'm in the house. I'd like to think I'm mindful that my gun is on the table.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, in fact, if I'm not, I'm being negligent. And so if I hear someone else come in the house, my first thought is, I got to remember that gun's, right there on the table. Well, okay, your phone is not a gun. However, it is something we invest so much of our lives in that the mere presence of the object is a reminder, hey, there's the thing. And, I've even, this kind of going back more directly to the Bible, I was looking once for an iPhone Bible. And maybe after this we can transition to some advice for those who are looking to get a Bible. I was looking for a computer Bible that was much more like a reading experience, something that was not about like, oh, it's a search tool, it's this or that, but really was just me wanting to have a pleasant Bible reading experience on my phone. And I do like the app that I got. I don't know if it's still out there. And again, we're not recommending all of these, but I'll say for those curious, it was called a New Bible. It might just be New Bible, but it was spelled N-E-U, so kind of fancy pants.
Okay.
Well, anyway, so and it's actually a beautiful app.
You showed that to me.
Yeah, of all the apps that I have that are Bibles, I really like the feel, the look of that one, and yet I'm still looking at it on my phone, and my brain knows that. It just feels different because this is the place where I do YouTube viewing. This is the place where I text my kids, and I just happen to have my phone there. Is it convenient? Is it nice? Like if I'm stuck on a plane and I my Bible, I've maybe I put my Bible in my checked luggage and I don't have it on me, you bet I'll pull that up and I'll read it. But I can say qualitatively it's not the same as having a good Bible in my lap reading it.
Especially because you can in fact this used to be this way, which is why I can imagine this more easily. You get up in the morning, you do your prayers, whatever, get the coffee going, and you go down and sit downstairs with your Bible and coffee, and you know what you're never worried about? That you're going to get a notification, or the Bible is somehow going to distract you in some way.
Yeah.
It's just you and the Bible, and you just sit there quietly, distraction-free, and I agree. There's something about it being on a phone or on a computer that will never be the same.
It's just not. I think, what if the day before I texted Ms. Robinson late saying, hey, when you get in today, we thought we had a week more to do the magazine, but we only have today. We've got to do it today. And
your office caught on fire.
Yeah. And so, on my phone, it's literally a swipe away. I can see if Mr. Robinson replied to that email, right? It's literally one thumb movement away. And there's no temptation to that when it's you, your Bible, and at least for me, a cup of coffee.
Okay, I'm forcing this one.
All right, force
A
away.
short anecdotal statement. As you know, I was on a search for a new car because my current cars have, in fact, the RAV has 299,000 miles on it. We're on the 300,000 mile watch.
Seeing you guys in that RAV, I continue to be impressed. It's like, man, that thing just keeps on going. That's amazing.
Toyota knows how to make those V6 engines, man. That thing is fantastic. Okay. And then my other car, our truck has 250,000 miles on it. So it was just time to invest in a newer car with fewer miles on it. And so because it's a newer car, it has more things on it, more sensors on it. And I finally have my first thing about our newer car that actually bothers me. It's kind of disappointing. Well, since it's the newer car, it tends to go into the garage now, and so I go out and pull it in the garage, or you start it up for the first time, and you're backing out of the garage. Well, it's got all these LiDAR sensors around it on every corner, and it's like immediately like, hey, you are way too close to everything in here. So immediately I start my car thinking, I could drive my car. It starts beeping at me immediately, and I'm like, you know what? I miss dumb old cars that didn't care how close I was to something, and then I don't know, just all this kind of reminded me of I like the simpler days when things didn't try to constantly get my attention to tell me I'm in danger.
Yeah, I've had a few times when my car would beep because I'm about to make a dumb mistake, and I'll say, "Oh, thank you, nanny car. Thank you for protecting me."
Well, I'm a little harsher on my car. I'm like, hey, I don't even know how I drove for the last 35 years without you beeping at me all the time.
Okay, so we thought before we wrap up, we ought to wrap up here pretty soon. Yep. But still, we know some of you, you may not even have a physical Bible. It's possible some of you out there just have a Bible on your phone or your iPad, or I keep saying iPad like I'm advertising for Apple.
You could struggle with an Android
non-Apple pad of some sort, right? Or your computer. And I was like, all right, you guys, you're just so charming and convincing. I'm going to get a physical Bible. Well, then what are some things to keep in mind? Well, one is going to be, and it's actually the same thing with an online one. It's just online makes so many more immediately available, is you need to commit to a good translation. Mr. Robinson, I actually have one on my desk right now, which is kind of an odd little translation. It's called the Williams New Testament. It's kind of a private translation. I say private. It's because it wasn't like a big committee. It was this one guy. And he's actually got a good take with some of the Greek verbs. And so I got that for research on a telecast a long time ago.
How new is the translation?
Oh, that one's kind of old, actually. That one, I think it came out in the 70s, but I got to admit, I'm not real sure. But anyway, you can collect a bunch, but really, when let's say you can only buy one Bible, you really need to pick a good translation. And I'm not weird. We are not saying, in fact, I'll make sure I point to an article on the livingyouth.org webpage. There is no perfect translation. Just so you know, the King James Version, no matter how many people out there like 1611 or bust, they think the King James Version was that God inspired that in English and nothing else is inspired. No, it has mistakes in it. The New King James Version has mistakes. The NIV definitely has mistakes.
Well, one's a disaster, let's be honest.
But what do we recommend? If you're really going to get one, we would encourage you to consider the New King James. One, it'll match all the scripture. Well, not all of them, because sometimes we use other translations for special cases, but it's our default Bible for the magazine. It's our default Bible behind the lectern for most of the ministry uses that. It's a good balance. And rather than explain all the reasons why we use it, I will do my best to link. We have an article in which Living Church News is it? It's the July-August 2023 Living Church News titled, "Why the New King James Version?" It's not a declaration that it is perfect. It is simply an explanation for why that is our default Bible. Now, that's in English, by the way. I know that often in Spanish language, they recommend actually one or two. Mr. Hernandez, I know, has strong opinions one way or the other, and some others. And I'm not even going to pretend to be experts in that regard. But at least in the English language, we really like the New King James. Another element we wanted to highlight is to beware of study Bibles, quote unquote. And man, there's a ton out there now. If you want the single women's vibrant life Bible, there's going to be one out there for you. If you want the masculine, manly, grow a beard today Bible, there's going to be one out there. Miss Robinson wouldn't need that one. I would need that one more likely. But what those are, those study Bibles, is one, it's a way for them to make more Bibles, just so you know. It's also a way for them to try to appeal to niche audiences. But how do they do that? by investing a lot of their own content, their own teachings, their own doctrines, their own ideas. And I would just caution you about that because, one, they're going to get wrong the things that most everybody gets wrong, which is immortality of the soul. What is the destiny? Where do you go when you die? What is the purpose of man? What's the identity of Israel? What is the actual true gospel? They're going to get those things wrong, and I would encourage you to try to just get a Bible that doesn't have a lot of that kind of stuff invested inside it. My half sister gave me a beautiful gift once at a feast site. It's the only feast site she ever visited because she didn't attend the church, but she heard I was speaking. She asked if she could come, and that was fine. She got to hear me give a sermon, hear her little brother, since I thought I was the oldest till I discovered I had a sister, give a sermon. And she worked at a bookstore that sold Bibles, and she actually had a nice one. It had my name on it. She had embossed on it. It was a really nice gift, and I do like it. I'll actually get it out and read it from time to time. It's a New King James. She knew that I like the New King James. However, I can't remember what it's called, like the it's not apologetics. I like apologetics. I can't recall, but it had to do with pushing back against social trends. And it's filled with anecdotes, stories, essays about various social ideas and political ideas. And the writing is actually not bad in those things. It's not, but when I read that Bible and I come across one of those things, it's hard to avoid it all, and it gets to be a distraction. And I tend to only go to that Bible if I'm in a mood to read and be distracted, frankly, and because it's a bit of a distraction. So we generally recommend against study Bibles.
No, I would agree with that. I have a study Bible and I look through it for a while, but I agree. If you're just trying to sit down with the Bible and read through it, it is a distraction.
Yeah. Now, again, we're not trying to say they're overall bad. In fact, the one my half sister gave me, I'm not going to throw it away. I actually do like it. It's actually pretty good, and some of their articles are actually pretty good that they put in there. But that said, when I think of those, they're usually the historical ones. There's something like that. I would treat that material not as the Bible, and it wouldn't be my go-to study Bible.
You know, last time I was in an actual Christian Bible or bookstore and looking for a Bible, I was really disappointed with the New King James Version offerings because while popular within the Church of God circles, not so much with the rest of mainstream Christianity. I found that there's other translations that people go for, so it can be hard to find one. In fact, what I would consider man, if you had the money and could find one, the Thomas Nelson New King James Version wide margin
center column reference,
it's just an incredible Bible.
They are hard to find.
Yeah,
and
expensive.
They are. That's actually, that leads right into the last point, Mr. Robinson. Look at you. It's like you're psychic. Feel free and start cheap if you have to. You can get kind of a thin line, what's often called a thin line Bible for a little cheaper. It's thinner, fits in your bag a little bit more easily. It doesn't have wider margins, so if you're going to write and take little notes, in fact, the pages can be kind of thin, so the ink might kind of soak through. But hey, if you're just looking to start with a physical Bible for the first time, feel free and get whatever you can afford. You don't have to break the bank. Now, recently, like when my son graduated from the second year program in LE last year, we wanted to get him a top quality Bible. Well, it's taken us about a year. We still haven't done it. Finally found one he really wanted, kind of shopped around, and that's exactly what it is. It's a kind of specialty line, New King James, Thomas Nelson, wide margins, center column reference, that is so hard to find. It's going to take 6 months for it to arrive. But we did order it because he said, "That's it, Dad. If you're going to give me one, that's it." So that's what we're getting. But the thing is, he already has one. He has a cheaper Thomas Nelson New King James that he uses for church. But the cover's it's not leather, so the cover's starting to come apart. However, you know what? He's got one, and he does use that. This one is just kind of a special thing for myself. I'm using this opportunity to get me one I've kind of wanted for a long time. It's a goat skin leather, I hope vegans out there not upset, but no, I'm looking forward to that. But at the same time, I've still got the one I bought way back where Feast and Big Sandy.
My wife has a true proper vintage version, and I bought mine later. And after a few years, the binding started to come apart. But luckily for me, I was in the print business and sourced another vendor who specialized in repairing things like that. And so I was just fortunate in that. So it's been good to find.
I have the opposite story, Mr. Robinson. So my first big New King James version I bought my very first feast in the 80s. We were camping at Big Sandy, for the feast, and so I bought it there at the Big Sandy bookstore. And it started to come apart. Well made. I mean, Smith sewn, I think, but it started to come apart. And I thought, I can fix this with painter's tape. So it's still got these painter's tape kind of failing at holding the pages in and such, and it actually looks terrible. But man, I can't help it. I wrote down my baptism date in there. I wrote my future wife's baptism date and those kind of things. So I do love that.
You got it before you were married.
Oh yeah. I definitely. It was literally my first feast.
Well, if anybody's still listening out there, do your best. I hope this was helpful for everybody today, and there are a lot of options out there, but I think in essence, if you can get a good New King James Version Bible, overall is the top pick.
That's what we definitely recommend for a thing. And you know what? That's something I want to make sure I said when we left is often the best Bible is the one you have. It's it's better to reach out and get one. If you're still really young and your parents have one and you don't, hey, feel free. I don't think they're going to get upset if you ask to take it off the shelf and be able to read that Sabbath morning or use that. Just sit down, have a nice cup of I say cup of coffee. Some of you might be too young for coffee as far as I know, but a cup of coffee. If you want an excuse to read, go grab your notes from last Sabbath. And just look up the scriptures that you wrote down, the references you wrote down for that Sabbath. But start looking them up in a physical book. Start enjoying the blessings and benefits of doing that. And I think Ms. Robinson and I both feel you'll discover it's a worthwhile shift.
Smith and Robinson.